the one earnings of the week. And it's a big one because it does tell a pretty big story about the broader semiconductor market through the lens of foundry side. So GlobalFoundries, Pat.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with GlobalFoundries, they're a leading foundry that is global. Okay. And they were global before it was cool. Back in 2009, they were a spinoff from AMD. And I actually ran corporate marketing when we spun it off and created the corporation with Mudabala, who was a huge investor. So, boy, have they come a long way, right? They're one of the only foundries with a truly global footprint. But more importantly, they do semiconductor foundry work. They're very focused, right? They're not kind of a TSMC that is doing everything for everybody. I don't want to call TSMC the Walmart, but they do kind of have this top to bottom. GlobalFoundries is very focused on things like 5G, on power, on automotive. They do a little bit of compute, kind of a carryover from the AMD days, but not a whole lot. They're one of the leaders, if not the leader, in silicon photonics. So how did they do? Well, they did pretty well, right? They hit on the higher end of their guide, which I think was really good. Now, declines were in areas that, quite frankly, you would expect, right? What is down in the market? Smartphones. Yeah, smart mobile devices were down 19% year over year. Communications infrastructure, primarily comms infrastructure, 5G is down. Data center is okay, but also down. But that was down pretty big, 38%. Personal computing, again, it's kind of a nit right now. I mean, it's 52 million on $1.8 billion in revenue a quarter. It was down significantly, but on the bright side, automotive up 200%. Home and industrial IoT right now, industrial IoT up, home IoT down, netted out to be a little bit of a push, but growth, right? About 3%. So nothing that you wouldn't expect. There was a lot of talk on the call about these long-term agreements. And when I read through the transcript, my takeaway was, hey, we've got long-term agreements, but we're not trying to make them onerous to the sides and squeeze them to the point where, we're having them, and this is my number, chew into 50% of the wafers that maybe weren't delivered, right? Or that the customer didn't need. But the key is that with these long-term agreements, the true view of the market is probably subdued a little bit, right? Because in these LTAs, for a long-term agreement, you have wafer agreements that you have to abide by. But anyways, solid work here, and I'm really interested to see competitively when Tower Semiconductor closes and Intel embraces that, and what happens next.
Yeah, I think you hit it. This one's can get pretty geeky pretty quick because of the kind of stuff they focus on. There is definitely some great stuff that was talked about that you didn't necessarily dig into, like their Lockheed Martin partnership that was announced. They're doing some interesting stuff on 3D.
Hey man, I had to leave you something, dude.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. With some 3D heterogeneous integrations. I mean, look, Pat, this is probably the most interesting thing to continue to talk about is, we had this great run of tech for like the last couple of months, and it's sold off pretty hard in the last month. And again, we're not a stock show, but the market is the market, and these companies do very much emotionally react to the market in terms of how they do their business. And so, we had a lot of Q2 is the bottom. We heard from Pat. Lisa had made similar overtures. Jensen hasn't had to make any comments like that. But, GF's GlobalFoundries is beating. We saw Lattice had a good number. Are we out of the woods? Before I just kind of dig, just kind of the question here, how do you feel Like, are we beating because expectations, it's kind of, we put the bar on the ground and now these companies are jumping over it, and, we set low expectations, these huge cuts in expectations, or have we turned a corner now? And, we're, even though some of the macro data is still a little rough, tech's about to see another explosion.
Yeah, so I like to separate the market. Like I put you have to set memory aside, memory and storage. So memory and SSDs, just because they're so off and they're so crushing. Well, the good news is GlobalFoundries doesn't do any of that. So then you're into, RF, you're into kind of different impact of what hits there. So I think, though, this shows the diversification of GlobalFoundries, and also the impact of these long-term agreements that, by the way, and Tom brought this up on the call, CEO Tom Caulfield. Hey, remember when right, we couldn't get chips, we couldn't get that 1 cent chip to sell that $75,000 car. I mean, heck, there are luxury cars that they couldn't ship with a radio because they couldn't get a MOSFET or some analog PMIC out there. And hey, we've got a good question coming in from Jeff Frick. Hey, 1 year post CHIPS Act impact. Well, hey, Jeff, the money hasn't been distributed, the awarding hasn't been done, and quite frankly, doing what government's done, we're kind of sitting on our hands right now, and companies are waiting to get that money. But some companies didn't wait. I mean, Intel went in and made Dan, what was it, $200 billion commitment globally, $100 billion commitment just in Columbus, Ohio, with or without the CHIPS Act. And what Intel did to defray the risk is they did a couple JVs with some companies to be able to split the financing, so risk return in there. Great question, and we love the questions we get from our awesome audience.
We don't always take them, because if we did, we'd have no time to talk about our topics. But I think since we were asking about the market, that was really well timed. I talked to a few different press outlets about that 1 year thing, and Pat, I got a slightly different view. I mean, look, the government administration is, just terrible at actually executing plans, whether it's been whether it was the Obamacare, the amount of years it took before any of that actually took hold, or something as big as the CHIPS Act. I think the expectation, at least for the chips part, the science part's a little bit different, because the science part's a lot more small companies, universities, it's innovators, it's VCs, it's accelerators. But the CHIPS Act is really big, mega global companies with huge balance sheets that are going to largely be benefiting from that cash. So that was not a private chat, Pat. Okay. Anyways, and so long and short here is that the science part will be delayed. The CHIPS Act part of it, I just think they know these companies can cover it, and they'll get around to it.